Thanks for the nice introduction. And thanks for the fantastic presentation to follow. So basically, this is based on papers that literally came on arXiv this morning. So the slides are much less pretty than Yisrael's. So the somewhat less interesting slides, but very hot off the press. We just published a bunch of papers this morning, and we'll make sure to put the links in, make them available to you. But it also, this is perfect to follow, Yisrael, because basically what we're trying to do is start to risk model the risks of AI. And cyber is the reason I'm here is that we started with cyber risk as the main risk that we modeled. So what I'm going to show you is our methodology for risk modeling and why we think that's important. What's all the benefits of that? How is it better than what the AI companies are doing now? And then some tentative results from our cyber risk modeling, where you'll see examples of the kind of uplift that Yisrael was talking about. So we'll set just the context of why do we think this is necessary? Why did we do it for cyber specifically? I'll spend the brunt of the time on all the use cases. And then I'll tell you a little bit fun, because we're using both human and AI experts to create estimates. So I'll show you some interesting findings from that, which is kind of on a meta level. And then I'll share with you this is early work, so what limitations do we have and what are the kinds of things that we want to work on going forward and that we hope that others in the community will keep working on. And then we'll have time for questions at the end as well. I don't have 40 minutes of material, so it's fine. So context. This is kind of the state of AI risk management. Basically, so as of last year or earlier this year, the main AI companies, the 12 leading AI companies, have published these frontier safety frameworks that you may all have seen. We have the author of Meta's one is here, Joshua, if you can listen to him later today. And basically what they are is if-then scenarios based on capabilities. So if a model has a dangerous capability and a benchmark or an eval shows that it has this thing, that triggers this thing, a set of mitigations. And that's good as a start. These are early days of AI risk management. But we believe this is grossly insufficient because it assumes that the capability equates the risk, right? But coming from a risk perspective, we know that there's a whole chain between this hazard, the source of risk, all the way to the actual harm, right? You got to look at the threat actor, you got to look at all the hurdles that they will pass through, all the defenses that the defenders might put up, and then you also want to ideally quantify it, to have something more tangible than a capability yes, no, binary, like capability bad, capability good. And we're already seeing how in both Anthropic and Google DeepMind, how this gives them a little bit, in my mind, too much flexibility because they can actually tweak these safety frameworks and tweak the capabilities, like you mentioned, like DeepMind has changed the capabilities they're using already. So, number of downsides. We're proposing instead quantitative risk modeling, and basically still making use of benchmarks and the data that is out there, but using them as inputs to feed quantitative risk models, where we actually try to, still with tons of uncertainty, of course, and I'll show you what they look like, but try to get to a quantified number for a severity and probability of harm. And that it creates a bunch of useful use cases that we don't have with the existing paradigm. So for decision makers in labs, it can lead to much better informed deployment and development decisions. For decision makers in regulators and government, it's a first step towards what we have in all other safety critical industries, which are risk thresholds. Like the regulator says, in aviation, there's a number of X million of flight hours that you can have per accident, right? And in nuclear, right, like there is the risk of a meltdown that would increase the radiation risk around the area by X% over the baseline, right? Like we have this, and yes, it takes time, right? Like it's not surprising we don't have it in AI yet. It's early days, but we believe that's where we need to get to. So that's helpful there. Also for the defenders among you, right? Like Yusra was saying, as a defender, where should I focus my mitigations? I don't have unlimited dollars to spend on beefing up my defenses. Where should I put those? So the models can tell you where mitigations are most effective. And then for the eval community, where we also have representatives here, right? Where are the gaps? So a lot of evals and benchmarks in cyber has been on sort of the thing that's been easy to test for, like is the vulnerability discovery, et cetera. But we have less good ones for example, spear phishing and for later parts of the kill chain, where like lateral movement, that kind of thing, which is kind of harder to test for. So these models can indicate where we need better evals. And why did we start with cyber? So we're trying to focus on the 4 risks of that the EU AI Act has in the code of practice, which is cyber, CBRN, which is chemical, bio, radiological, nuclear, manipulation, and loss of control. But we started with cyber for a number of reasons. There is more data, for better or worse. Thankfully, we have fewer bio incidents than we have cyber incidents, even as much as we don't like cyber incidents. So there's more data. And basically, B, I think it is the canary in the coal mine, right? Like, this is from that Anthropic one that Yisroel mentioned, the one the other day, where, so all year we've seen these OpenAI and Anthropic reports of more and more sophisticated use. And then this one came out a few weeks ago, if you saw it, which has much more autonomy in what the AI actually does and where the human can step back. So cyber is the one where we're sort of closest to the kinds of big risks that worry us. So we started with cyber. This is a little bit the methodology that we followed. So basically, the risk universe is still vast, right? Like, even if you focus in on cyber and malicious use, there's still a ton of different scenarios. So we had to decompose the risk universe into representative scenarios that we would model in depth. And basically, what we did there is we sort of cut the universe by actor, target, and vector to create combinations that were the most representative, and using established taxonomies for this where we can. So Sela Nivo, if you heard him earlier, or no, you might be missing Sela. He's right now. Thanks for being here instead of with Sela. Why the wrong choice? So he did this RAND report last year, right, that defined these operational capability levels. So we transposed that to actors. For targets, we use critical infrastructure sectors from the CISA and what's it called in the UK? Something similar. And then for vectors, Google DeepMind had a good paper earlier this year where they had created a taxonomy of different kinds of attacks. So by cutting it by actor, target, and vector, we defined a number of risk scenarios, which I'll show you. And then for each of those models, we then decompose the risk into frequency, likelihood, and magnitude. And this is what allows us to actually do that valuable analysis that I was talking about and actually break down and see where is the uplift? Like, is it coming from quantity or quality or just lower barriers of entry, that kind of thing. So basically, this is where we ended up with our 9 for this study, the one that just came out this morning. These are the 9 risk models we created. And a bit of an ugly slide, as mentioned, but trying to be sort of representative across the OC1, which is just the amateur hobbyist hackers, down to OC5, which is the highest prio operations from the most capable nation states. And trying to vary different kinds of targets, so enterprises and data-rich and financially attractive targets, critical infrastructure targets, and espionage interesting targets. And then also different kinds of vectors, right? So we started with the Rodriguez, the Google DeepMind paper, but then added in additional complexity so that we really try to cover different kinds of full attack vectors, from social engineering to all the way to polymorphic malware. So those are the models that I'll show you. And then this ugly slide this is a Bayesian network. And this is software that we're putting the finishing touches on and that we'll put out in January so that people can play around with it. Because this is basically where you can play around with the model and put in your own assumptions. So up here, we arrive at a total, the total expected loss from the whole thing based on the impact, number of attack attempts, number of attackers, and probability. And then the probability of success is broken down. Here we use the MITRE attack framework, and for each scenario, that MITRE attack has 14 different elements. We adjust it so that we take the relevant ones for each scenario and give a probability to each of those. And then we map the benchmarks. So as I mentioned, we're still grounding this in real-world data in the benchmarks. So for this test case, we used Bounty Bench and SciBench, which some of you will be familiar with, which are good benchmarks that sort of passed our tests in terms of validated by the community, has the ability to sort of do a difficulty ranking. So these are the different tasks. So we sampled 10 tasks. They're normal like CTF, well in Cyberbench they're CTF, capture the flag tasks. And then you can then set the level of the AI capability. So at the time of running these, it was 3.7, that was SOTA. So SOTA could get to, or Claude 3.7 could get up to here. But then we also measure like how much would the risk be if Claude can actually saturate it and go all the way. So that's a bit of the methodology, bit of a rapid run through that. Happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to show you more like what are the use cases for, so that you can see what the benefits are of this. So first we can look at overall uplift. So the big caveat here, as I mentioned, like the numbers should be taken with a grain of salt. Like this is early days, and there's many limitations to this kind of work. But it kind of, the end number is not what really matters, right? Like what matters is it's a means to an end. Like you put a number there so that you can then do the sensitivity analysis and compare the relative impact of different factors. But having said that, you can get the overall uplift number. So baseline is not now, it's kind of, baseline is like no AI use. So basically an attacker with negligible use of AI, just relying on the traditional, whatever traditional is these days. But baseline, no AI use. And then we have in blue, you have SOTA, which is then Claude 3.7, and green saturated. So when the models can do the hardest tasks in Cybench and Bounty Bench. So this is already interesting, right? You see a number of interesting things. These are the uncertainty bounds. So for each estimate, we asked our experts to give the most likely value as well as an upper and lower bound. And then we propagate those through Monte Carlo. Question, or should we hold questions to the end? Or if it's
just a clarification.
Yes.
Can you just say a little bit more about saturated? What exactly?
Yes. Means? Yeah, totally. Yeah, let's take clarifying questions as we go. So basically, yeah, I didn't explain this fully. So for each of these variables, like you have these different probabilities, you have like a dollar amount of the impact if the attack succeeds. For each of those, we want to make them contingent on real world data. To make the models future-proof so that you don't have to go through the whole exercise. You can just plug in new numbers as AI gets better. And what we've started with are these Bounty Bench and Cybench. So two benchmarks as the input there. But the model is agnostic. Like you can plug in eval results or any red teaming, etc. But basically, the baseline is if you have no AI assistance, right? Like there's no AI that can help you better than what the humans can do already themselves. And then SOTA is, so we look at what can the models do now, and that as of earlier this year, they could get to about here on these two. This is a sampling of 10 of the around 40 CTF tasks. We took the 10 that was representative in terms of increasing order of difficulty and ones that are sort of consistent. And so this is SOTA, and then saturated would be the model has saturated the benchmark. They can do every task. They have 100% on that benchmark, which means, yeah, the most difficult task on that thing. So yeah, great clarification. I purposely didn't want to go into like too much detail, but that's important to know here, right? Because basically what you see here is most of the time the current level or the baseline, current SOTA is already helping from the baseline, but not everywhere. And saturated will, the models in their current imperfect form suggest that we will see a lot higher risk when the models are capable to do everything in those two benchmarks. And then we have this interesting guy, which, either this is a flaw of the sort of stochastic model, right? Because basically we are using confidence intervals here, and we are propagating them through Monte Carlo. So either this is a flaw, or it potentially correctly suggests that if you are North Korea and you have your highest priority cyber operation, it's actually downlift at the moment. Like the AI would actually, you'd spend more time correcting the code, or if you send off the agent autonomously, you would actually spend more time rectifying it. So, we in a few months or in 6 months or so, we'll have actual real-world data that we can compare to. So we don't know, but it's possible that this is, either a flaw or an actual representation of that at lower levels, LLMs helps a lot. Then it starts to get a little bit less. Maybe ransomware, ransomware as a service is a very well-oiled machine, right? Maybe it's similar to when we introduced other technologies, right? Like you need to redo your processes to take advantage of the new technology. So maybe AI is just not helping there yet, but it could at saturated levels. And maybe here, top North Korea will need saturated to make use of it. And this is what the distributions look like. So here, basically, you have in the solid lines, you have the baseline performance, so current level of risk. And then the dotted ones are SOTA and saturated. So basically, in all cases, what you see is, so this is probability distributions over total risk on the x-axis. So you see how the risk both increases, so the majority of the curve moves to the right, and we get larger harm levels, as well as gets more uncertain, right? Like the curve flattens, and we just have, obviously by definition, we have more certainty about the current non-AI state, right? But here we get a lot more uncertainty. So that's a pretty uniform pattern across all of these, and especially prominent for like the lower level actors. And then one thing that I mentioned, which I think is really valuable, is the ability to then break down into different kinds of uplifts. So here we're looking at the 4 risk factors and how much the variance they drive of the uplift in risk. So we have in green the probability, in blue number of actors, yellow number of attempts, and pink or orange or whatever, damage. So basically, we have, probability is to attack better, like quality. Number of attempts is quantity, right? Can they just automate it and just run many more attempts? Number of actors but it goes to the incentives and the sort of barriers to entry. Will there be more malicious actors that attempt to do these kinds of attacks? And then damage is kind of a quality in the inverse sense measure as well, right? Like, do you get more bang for your buck for your attack if it succeeds the whole way? So what we see here is that AI helps with all of these, right? So it's pretty interesting that there's no dominant factor across. These are all the different risk models, right? From the low-level hobbyists through to sophisticated cyber criminal syndicates, to all the way to major nation-state actors. And apart from this downlift that we talked about, right? Like, and apart from here, you have that damage is really the one that changes here. But otherwise, fairly uniform. Like there's some speed uplift, there's some quality uplift. We see a little bit of all of them. Doubling down specifically on efficacy. So here, this is probability only. So you see the same thing here, right? That you get some increases in the efficacy, the quality of the attack, but it's it's not the whole story at all, right? Like it's only part of the story. And then you can double click. This is for any on the defense side out there, right? This is where it gets interesting. Here we click down to the MITRE attack level, and you have on the x-axis you have the 9 different risk scenarios, and on the y-axis you have the 14 MITRE attack steps. And red means that it attributes more. There's more attribution to the risk from that element, and blue means less. So as we see, right, like there's still a lot of places where AI doesn't really change the picture much, right? Like, there's some of these steps like command and control and collection where the AI might help you do some strategizing, but it's not going to be a huge part of the story. But then we have places like initial access and execution where, and again, indicated by the models, this is not gospel, but indicated by the models that the AI can help a lot. So as a CISO, as an InfoSec team, then you would want to focus your mitigation efforts on there. Also here, the final impact, sort of pulling the trigger in the attack, and privilege escalation as well. So that's an interesting use case. Then we have volume, which I mentioned is sort of the inverse of the quality. We have quantity, right? So just across the board, the models indicate that the malicious actors will be able to run more of these attacks, which makes sense, right? I mean, I think that's the first thing we saw, and I think that's what Yisrael mentioned as well, right? That the speed uplift is kind of the first one we see. And then we also attempted target uplift. This is kind of punching above your weight, or like going outside of your league. Like, can a smaller actor go after targets that prior would have been out of their league, right? Like, so the way we did that, there's no clean formula to do it, but the way we did it is we looked at sort of these pairs of scenarios, so similar kind of target, but a small and large version, so infrastructure in this case. And then we tried to determine the proportion of actors, this is number of actors on here, that will go after larger versus smaller targets to see if, with the help of AI, will they be emboldened and start attacking larger targets instead? And highly indicative, but we're seeing potentially some at saturated levels of AI. You could imagine that a larger proportion will attack the bigger targets because they were previously unable to, but that is much more. There's more to take there. So that was some of the use cases. Now I just want to show you 2 slides on human versus AI estimators, because basically one of the things with risk modeling is that we use, when you don't have data, this is drawn from in nuclear power and aviation and other industries where, when you don't have the data, what you rely on is expert elicitation. Basically, you take the expert, you put them in a room, you put them through a Delphi process where they create estimates, discuss with each other, revise their estimates, etc. And this is highly resource constrained, right? Like, there's a limited number of, well, hopefully more with conferences like this, but there's a limited number of AI and cyber experts, and it takes time to create estimates for every uplift, in these models. So what we're experimenting with is using AI, sort of the AI versus AI, but on a different level, which is the using AI to create estimates as well. So this is similar. I don't know if you've seen, but there's some people who recently released new companies that have like LLM forecasters, and they're pretty quickly catching up with human level performance. So that's what we're testing out here, to have simulated experts that are LLMs. We give them different personas. We have them sort of in a Delphi study on their own. So so very early days, but so I see some potential for that. And so I wanted to show you 2 interesting things that we noticed there. These are slightly complex charts, but you have these tasks of bounty bench and side bench, and then you have the uplift in risk that they lead to. So this is human and this is LLM. So the interesting thing here is that the LLMs are much more jagged here, right? Like they assign different kinds of uplifts based on different kinds of tasks, right? Versus the humans have this kind of smooth, the more difficult the task, the larger estimates that they provide. So, and of course, we don't know yet who is right or wrong. We will next year. But I find these guys a little bit suspicious because we know humans have a bias to sort of, it's a group process, it's a Delphi process, and they're presented with one task at a time, right? So there is a likelihood that they have a bias to just go higher each time. So there's either that the LLMs are better at, don't have that bias, or it is that their context window is just not good enough, and they look at each task in too much in isolation, and therefore have this jagged pattern. But definitely something to investigate there. And then it turns out the LLMs are also more conservative. So this is SOTA unsaturated for humans and SOTA unsaturated for LLMs. And as we see, not a huge difference here, but the humans are ascribing much more potential risk at saturated levels. And again, like LLMs might be too conservative. I've definitely noticed that. I was doing some in a Delphi study as a forecaster, and we were looking at 2040 for labor market effects, and I ran my numbers by GPT-5 and he or it was much more conservative than I was in terms of like the proportional effect on the labor market. So either we're seeing that they're just not good at the LLMs also are not good at thinking about the exponential into the future. But it could also be that humans are I think that's also a bias we've seen in forecasting studies, where if you go a bit further out into the future, humans they lose perspective a little bit and just sort of can assign pretty crazy numbers. So here we won't see for a while, for a few years, who's right, but it looks a little bit suspicious. So I'm pretty bullish on the LLM estimators. So going forward, basically, so lots of limitations here, right? Like we're putting out this study to try to stimulate the field for risk modeling, right? Like we have these frontier safety frameworks from the AI companies that I mentioned, and they all call for doing full risk management, but it's still limited in terms of the modeling. Actually, Meta, who's here today, is one of the better ones in terms of looking at different threat scenarios. So there's a lot of limitations, and that's why I advocate, caveat with the numbers themselves. It's more about the use cases. But these are some of the things that we and others will work on in the future. So additional benchmarks. So as I mentioned, right now we have SciBench and Bounty Bench only, right? Like that, and they're mapped to the whole chain. So that means that you have to do a large part of extrapolation, right? Like if the model can do this, can it also help over here? So plotting in much more benchmarks to it will make these risk models much better, and that's another reason why we're publishing them to stimulate folks to do that. Other KRIs as well, right? Like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be benchmarks; can be any kind of eval or red teaming results that you plug in. Using proprietary data, of course, is better. So Google DeepMind in theirs had 12,000 real-world examples of attacks, right? That they had with theirs and Mandiant's database. So of course we're relying on public data and our experts. So, but you could imagine how you could make these more robust with proprietary data. And then defense, like Yisrael was saying, we believe that the offense-defense balance is highly biased towards offense, right? Like the attackers are drawing more benefits from AI faster and to a greater degree. But of course, we hope that the defenders will catch up, right? So at the moment, we did not model AI defense, right? Like how much does the defense help? But the model can accommodate that, right? You have a similar MITRE framework, just a little bit less tested on the defense side, and you could incorporate that as well. So I think within the next year, which was our time frame, like we're still not seeing that much on the defense side, although people in this room might know more than me. But so we stuck to offense only, but I think the full thing should have defense also. Completely novel threats. I think our methodology is a little bit biased towards historical examples, since we need to create a baseline based on base rates and historical case studies. So if you wanted to do like AI worms attacking autonomous vehicles or something like completely AI sort of novel in every sort of actor and target and vector, then that methodology is less suited to that. So that should be developed. Tail risk, right? So I mentioned, like, I showed you these, we create these distributions where you get a sense of like the risk is X% that damage will be over X billion. But I think we're still not capturing the tail risk fully, and that's going to be important for example, for regulators setting those thresholds, right? Like what can we live with as a society? And also total risk. Like, so as I showed you, we picked 9 representative scenarios, but that is, I don't know, 10%, if that, of the overall risk space, right? So in an ideal world, we would eventually get to a total risk number, right? Like if OpenAI releases this model X, then the total risk to society as a whole goes up by X number of billions, right? So still far away from those, but yes, that's what I wanted to show you as hopefully some interesting cyber insights and some ideas on the need for risk modeling and the need that we keep pushing AI companies to not just say, look at this capability and take that as a proxy for the whole risk to society, but rather model the full thing. So with that, any questions? But there is also lunch after this, so I won't hold it against you if you don't have questions.
I'm curious whether you can speak a little bit about length of the kill chain and how that impacts the variance that gets introduced into these estimates?
Tell me more.
I would expect that as the kill chain gets longer, that the frequency, right, the probability of any given event happening ends up expanding, and so that is also going to have downstream effects onto the variance that gets introduced into these estimates that you're creating, right?
Yeah. So I've been having. So the other main organization that's working on risk modeling is called GovAI. If you know the Center for the Governance of AI in Oxford, now in London. So I was talking to them because basically, when you're doing these modeling, there's a question of like how many parameters to include in the model. Basically, so they felt that we were including too many. So they have in their risk modeling, and they've released one cyber model that you can check out on their website. They have much fewer parameters, and they have like one probability number. So I think since we want to be able to break it down and look at like where does the majority of the risk and the majority of the variance come from, we include, we break it down into much more steps. So that makes the whole model. So one thing is it makes the whole model more uncertain because you have more model uncertainty in addition to the uncertainty that you already have about the real world. Like you get model uncertainty on top of that, and then I think. This is not what you said, but I think another one is when you look at probabilities on all of them, and basically we're saying that an attacker has to succeed with every step in the attack, right? Like that lowers the probability because this is a combinatory. You have to do not each of them apply in every scenario, but you have to do this and this and this. But then, sorry, what's your question? If it introduces more variance?
So I was interested in understanding a little bit more about how you're accounting for the variance that gets introduced, and also like this is a great you underscored a really important methodological consideration here that right now you are just assuming it sounds like at least that every single step in this kill chain is going to be applied in order to reach a particular outcome for a threat actor.
So two things. So basically. So we take as a starting point the 14 MITRE tactic pieces, but then each scenario will trim it down to have like maybe 8 or 9, like the ones that are must-have for an attack to succeed. So we trim it down a bit there so that we don't, so you remove any step that is just nice to have, right? That's one thing. And then in terms of propagating the variance, basically each of these is estimated with a most likely value, like a mode or a median, and then an upper and lower bound, so your confidence interval. And then we fit those to a beta distribution to create distribution, and then we sample from those and do a Monte Carlo simulation with like 10,000 or 100,000 runs to come up with the overall number. So that allows us to hopefully capture some of the uncertainty, right? And then you get to these distributions. But of course, it's this early days. This is kind of what this is our best approach at the moment, I would say.
And then just one final follow-up. If you go back to the slide right before.
Which one? This one?
Yeah, right there. So the variance bounds are actually crossing the baseline, right?
Yeah.
So
yes,
it would
exactly.
not be statistically significant, or it would be.
So we haven't applied like the traditional statistical significant at like 5% level or anything because I think we don't want to tell people, we don't want to say that these numbers are necessarily correct, right? Like we're putting this out there as a proof of concept. But they are very wide. No, so we haven't tested specifically like is it this statistically significant that this is a decrease here? So I think it's only the ones where it's more clear where you would say where you would look at it like here. Question?
On that slide, could it be that for cases like, let's say, the ransomware, where it says that the state-of-the-art AI isn't really improving human capabilities, could it be also due to some kind of underrepresentation in the data for ransomware? Because I would imagine, like in CDF challenges, maybe ransomware is not really, you wouldn't find a lot of challenges that are, strictly ransomware.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that you are pointing there to another, like it's a limitation of the benchmarks we're using, right? Like that don't and they don't fit. Like we map SciBench and Bounty Bench to several of these, right? But they're not perfect indicators of them. So, but then again, they're only provided as an input to the expert. So the expert, either whether the human expert or an AI expert, creates an estimate based on. We give them other data as well. So, but I think you're right. Like there's a lot of other things that go into ransomware, and the ransom you get might be a proportion of your company's revenue rather than how good your attack was, right? So there's a lot of other factors that go in. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, great talk. Thanks for that. I'm really interested in this framework. So right now it's kind of like coming from the evals that currently exist,
Yeah.
and then you're kind of building on top of that. But
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any opportunity for the other way, where you're using this framework to inspire new evals. And
Yes.
whether that is something you're actively pursuing.
So, in a simple way, like yes, I mean you could just look at this and say, hey, we really don't have a good benchmark that measures command and control capability. So in a simple way, like you could just say, okay, that seems to be a gap, and then you could also look at just where do you have the most uncertainty. So it's not on this one, not shown here, but you can look at where you have the most uncertainty, and then you go, if you're an eval creator, you go and like, hey, I want to reduce this uncertainty here. Like we have a ton of uncertainty on how good the AI will help with exfiltration. I'm going to go there. So yes, reducing the variance there, that would be one of my ideal outcomes, right? Like if people were to use this kind of thing to decide where new evals are needed, yeah. Totally. Any final question? 3 minutes. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for your time.